Is beauty real? What is real? What is beauty?
Beauty is real in a different way. It's real in a universal human experience. And it motivates us to care about the quantifiable things.
Japanese definition of beauty is directly tied to sacrifice. So it's not just that cherry blossoms are beautiful. It's when they are falling that it's most beautiful.
We've been told now for 5 generations or more that beauty is just in the eye of the beholder, that beauty is whatever. How is it that we can reawaken people to beauty today?
So, gentlemen, we are here in the shadows of the Millennium Dome in East London, North Greenwich, for the first of hopefully an annual ARC, Alliance for Responsible Citizens event, a conference of people from around the world. And we're going to discuss whether beauty is real. We'll each introduce ourselves, but I'll start. I'm a musician from London myself, playing stringed instruments, banjos, guitars, and have spent many years touring, making records, and doing various other things and writing and other such things. So I come from sort of musical background, and my name's Winston.
I'm Jonathan Pageau, and I am, I would say, firstly, a liturgical artist, which means that I make images within the aesthetic and within the theology of the Orthodox Church for service in churches and, in service of that community. That's the main thing that brings me here. But I also am interested in the discussion about art and about beauty, and I do that on my own YouTube channel as well, talking about the symbolism within the traditional arts, but also trying to think about the history of art and what it means for us today.
My name is Timothy Patitsas, and I think I was invited because I wrote a book called The Ethics of Beauty, and it's a meditation on the role of beauty in Eastern Orthodox spiritual life and civilization. I'm also an interim dean, or the interim dean at Hellenic College, a micro college in Brookline, Mass, with 70 undergraduate students. And I'm also part of Beauty First Films. I'm Makoto Fujimura. I am an artist, and I also authored a book coming out of my studio practice.
We'll maybe start with, is beauty real? Which seems like a very difficult question to ask. What is real? What is beauty? And we can dig at the semantics, but then I guess maybe I'll just put a bit of context, I think, to make it relevant to the ARC Forum, because the ARC Forum, we're talking about a better future, a better story for the future. What are the things we can agree on for not just ourselves, but our children and our children's children? And what are those civilizational truths that are really not just worth preserving, but that we must preserve? So I guess within that context, Jonathan, is beauty real?
I think it is definitely real. I think it's important also to understand what we mean by real in the modern world, that have defined real as only that which can be quantified and measured and predicted very specifically in terms of scientific things. And beauty is real in a different way. It's real in a universal human experience. It's real in that it motivates us to care about the quantifiable things. That's why it was considered in the Neoplatonic tradition as being one of the 3 transcendentals, right? Goodness, truth, and beauty. Beauty was described as something like the radiance of the true and the good, or it's that you encounter which makes it possible for you to see that which is true and that which is good. If we understand it that way, then beauty not only is it real, but it is in some ways the motivator for most of us. So we have to be careful not to understand beauty just as visual beauty. We need to understand beauty as a deeper understanding of something like the harmony of the parts to the whole. Everybody has different standards of beauty, and the answer is yes to some extent. But there's a limit to that extent, and so there's actually there's a frame in which we can experience beauty, and there's some variation within it. There are extremes of experiences that we have, which we consider to not be beautiful, and to be painful, to be ugly, to be all these things. And so I think it is real, and it is objective in the same way that most things are objective. That is, there's a pattern and there's variation in that pattern. So,
Timothy, Jonathan there mentioned the concept of value within within art, and this is something you've written about, and the ethics of art. Would you be able to elaborate on that?
What I argue in my book is that among the three Socratic transcendentals, we're supposed to pursue them in a particular order, beauty first. And without saying too much about that, I think the proper sequence is beauty, goodness, truth. We become true through the pursuit of beauty, unfolding into an empathetic goodness, and we become true if we persist in this. But in terms of the reality of beauty, one of the arguments for aesthetics and sensing as being the first step in knowing is just the long history of evolution, that for billions of years, things survived without cerebral cortex. So they had to solve problems. They had to react purely based on aesthetics, on sensing. So it's as real as anything, as evolution is real.
There's something about that I've been thinking about, but I'm not sure if I can articulate quite yet, but in terms of how it orients you. And if I can contrast the idea of a beautiful horizon or sunset, it's beautiful because there's some sort of harmony in the infinite chaos of the cosmos, that for a moment it's there, it all fits together perfectly, and there's a beauty in that. But that doesn't, I wouldn't say that quite orients me in the way, let's say, I went to the Sistine Chapel last year and Michelangelo's Christ's hand at the top like this. And as soon as I saw it, I was completely overwhelmed, because for me, that had all the chaos of the horizon plus all the chaos of value and the order of reality in every way, all represented in that one image like that. And it did something the horizon couldn't do, which was told me what was right and how to move forward.
I think the sequence of beauty, goodness, truth is as a concentric, sequence. When it comes to the highest religious beauties, it should affect us physically and rationally as well.
So I come from a bit of a different traditional framework, which is Japanese definition of beauty, which is directly tied to sacrifice. So to the Japanese, it's not just that cherry blossoms are beautiful. It's when they are falling that it's most beautiful. So compared to, let's say, Western understanding of beauty, actually Eastern sensibility is closer to the Orthodox understanding. Typically in Western industrial realm, beauty is something that is perfect, something that has been, a beautiful car or iPhone, I guess. But that sense of perfection in Japan is at least qualified to be something that has been worn down or even broken. And so in my studio, how I paint is I use pulverized minerals. These are beautiful minerals to begin with, azurite, malachite, and so forth. But they're pulverized to create prismatic, refractive layers. And that brokenness as an entry point to beauty is something that it just embeds my thinking. In my work on theology of making, I posit that God is not just a source of beauty, but God is beauty. So in order to understand reality, you actually have to start there, because if we don't believe that the real with a capital R exists, the creator who created everything to be beautiful exists. When you create, you have to have faith of some kind to create into the future, right? So at least a faith in what you're doing. Faith in that your music will be heard by somebody or enjoyed by somebody. And so automatically you're in the framework of communication and you want communion. So the concept, is beauty real, is the central theological question.
There's an aspect in beauty which is condescension, and that's actually probably necessarily so, even though some people think something like beauty is perfection, but that's not true, because it has to be something like an ideal which comes to meet with the particular. Ultimately, I think in Christianity, the biggest mystery we come up against is something like the beauty of the cross, which is which is this extreme version where we have something which is the ugliest thing that you can imagine, but then becomes for us paradoxically a beacon of beauty. It's like it's the highest thing, the highest ideal, which comes to join with the lowest possibility that you can imagine.
To me, if beauty is real, then it's real everywhere. Even in the most ugliest realm, is it possible that ugliness has its own beauty? And isn't it, to me, as a Christian who believe in transcendental values, I want to know what if any reality is a burning bush that speaks through that burning bush, right? That God can speak through. And I want to be open to that possibility. I guess if I faced a situation where I completely disagreed, with a filmmaker about this film that seemed to me doesn't work, I want to know what the intent was and have some kind of way of addressing, my critical appraisal, I guess, of that. But ultimately, what I want to know is there hidden beauty?
I tend to believe that humans can force on themselves certain forms of being that are dangerous for them. And that let's take pornography, for example. Like it's an aesthetic experience that leads you into an excess, and it's damaging to us. And so the question is, can there be some hidden beauty in pornography? The answer is probably yes. But I do think that we can still say that as a phenomena, it is not participating in beauty in the way that we talk about this harmony of this joining of the whole and the particular together. It pulls you out into the extreme. And I think a lot of modern phenomena, that's what it does. It pulls us into these extreme experiences that don't have a harmony.
Guinness said in a speech this morning that contrast was the mother of clarity, and I think that's a little bit of... Walt Disney also said for his films, for every laugh you need a tear, and it's to give that spectrum of human emotion. I think that's maybe why, let's say, the symbol of the crucifix pops so much.
It's important to understand that when we, as Christians, when we see the crucifix, we see it in the light of the resurrection as well. And so
exactly.
And so it's not just that we're looking at someone being tortured. It's that we see in that the hope of something whole coming out of it, of something reformed.
So I think the perfection, the hidden perfection that is so insidious in a lot of bad art is that it comes from a place of ideological consistency. It's a truth-first ideology that, well, it's truth-first, so therefore it's some ideology that is pursued consistently all the way to the destruction of life and of actual human beings. We have this concept in the East of someone who's a fool for Christ. But it's understood to be a very hard way to live and for almost no one. Now everyone wants to be a fool for Christ. And every building and every painting aspires to this holy foolishness and this transgressiveness. And again, there's no contrast, and it just gets wearying. There's no prejudices left.
In some ways, because of the transgressive obsession, we've come to a point where transgression has become rote. Like there's this rote transgression,
But Jonathan, now are we at a place where we've been so overloaded with transgression that actually to be transgressive would be to reconnect with those more classical conceptions of art?
Beauty is transgressive. It has been since mid-90s, when I began to show in New York. You weren't supposed to talk about beauty. And I did. I quoted Isaiah 61 and talked about beauty and to be even more transgressive, and that in a sense that is true. When it's kind of completely, it's an upside down reality. It's an opportunity for artists who believe in creating beauty as our life's calling, to stand ground and to do what we're called to do.
There's a possibility now that I find interesting, which is to go back to those ancient understandings, to rediscover them and to represent them as treasures that have been lost and forgotten, but also to not forget the postmodern moment, because it has something of it that is worthy of keeping, but it just has to be in its proper place. I think that it's possible to do that even with art. I'm seeing people do that even in the church with icons, where they've taken some of the beautiful, the powerful aspects of what modern and contemporary art has. They're trying to integrate it somewhat with the traditional styles.
One of the deepest realms of going into postmodern, post-human, liquid modern reality is that when Christ was resurrected, he not only came back as a glorified human being, which is remarkable in itself, right? This guy went through everything, the hell itself, literally, in the human body, suffered, was tortured, and bled to death. And yet he chose that body to be glorified, right? Not only that, he came back as a wounded, glorified human.
Yeah.
Now, that's a profound reality, kind of an antidote to what the secularists will critique Western sense of perfected beauty. And isn't it amazing that he didn't come back as we would script it, right? This is as transgressive as you can get. Like this living, eternal God has wounds, and it is through his wounds that we are healed. That's a remarkable narrative that modernity has not addressed. And postmodernity, yes, maybe in the sense that imperfections become part of the, multiple narratives. No, but they still don't have the central story. My book is all about searching into Japanese history and stories and articulation of beauty, and finding that it might be a Christian story. We assume that it's secular or Shinto or Buddhist, but is it? And I wonder if that is true of many art forms that we have rejected, Christians have rejected as, not Christian enough. But in a sense, every form of art, if it's done honestly and has an enduring quality about them. So it's not just nails, this temporary, flashy pop, but there's something enduring that speaks university many years later. Then there's something there that, in my mind, is hidden that we need to excavate and understand better.
Is there something about the sacrifice and to do with the concept of human suffering? Again, this is back to the crucifix, and the one thing we all share in common, as you would matter if you're the Queen of England, or if you're in a slum in Mumbai, you will encounter suffering, and art is a way of orientating us to overcome that suffering.
I think we need a way to call evil, right? Violence against humanity as evil, and I think in relativistic value system that's not allowed, right? So it would be transgressive to say that, but I think beauty demands that. It points to justice, and my wife and I, since she's an attorney, we talk about beauty and justice being the flip side of the same coin, where you cannot have justice without beauty, because that justice may be justice, but it could be cruel, right? Yeah. It could be ugly. And you can't have beauty without leading to justice, goodness, and truth.
And you, in your book, you have this point where you talk about, in some way, the glaring truth, how the truth without beauty can be like a spear, right? It can cut. It lacks that when we say it all the time, it's like not all truths are good to tell, because we consider the impact that it would have.
We do take a truth-first approach to the soul, and although I think in the last 30 years, American psychotherapy has gotten away from this, to a degree. There's always the idea that, it's very Greek, it's very Platonic or Socratic. You always have to lead with beauty. Even if there were times when you could get away with a purely sort of truth, you have to remember that you too are a sinner, you too live by grace. And if you deal such strong medicine to another person, I think God will withdraw the grace a little bit from you and permit you to fall.
It strikes me that there's a concept of drama that's contained in beauty, and just as simple as, again, back to the idea of sacrifice. It can't just be a blossom, it's actually the falling of the blossom. We imagine the narrative around it, or the symbol of the crucifix. There's so much contained in the narrative, and I think that goes back to our orientation. And so, as well as us creating this art, it has an effect on us, either subliminally or explicitly, which is crucial for our continuing forward.
I think your point about orientation is definitely important. If you think about architecture, architecture city plan is just the easiest one to go to because it's the things we live in, and so there is, if you create a space with the wrong shape, it will orient you towards something else. There is something about proportion and scale that is related to purpose. And it's easier to see in architecture because it's so true. If you want to have an intimate place where you're playing poker, it's not the same as a grand entry hall with a staircase going up.
I heard of these collectors who actually hunt around antique shops in America looking for bad art. and they have these, it's not just Elvis on the black velvet, but it's Elvis flying on the American Eagle on the black.
Yeah.
And it's so bad.
Yeah, but don't you think that? But don't you think? Yeah. There's also humans have a capacity for irony, like a capacity for irony that is strong. But the irony usually is a kind of carnival. Right, so it's like that is that we do that, but we also know that it's not beautiful. Like it's not legitimately beautiful. It's something like it's like a game we play to remind ourselves what is beautiful.
You see something beautiful, and a journey has begun. Yes. Mm-hmm. And that's right. And some of the greatest works of art or literature or music, they prompt you someplace you can never go. And now this is an impossible journey. And it makes you rich and poor at the same moment. In that sense, no work of beauty really fits, right? It's all like, what's it doing here? Unless at some transfigured way you think of the whole as beautiful. But even then, there are moments of such intensity that you just want out, or you want some other.
We've been told now for 5 generations or more, I don't know, maybe 100 years, that beauty is just in the eye of the beholder, that beauty is whatever. And so how do you think, this is the question in the context of art, is that, first of all, do you think that beauty is important in the discussion about art? And then if so, I think most of us probably say yes. Yeah, I shouldn't even ask that question. But then how is it that we can reawaken people to beauty today in a world that is in some ways very disillusioned?
We have to be careful of words like real, that we don't, Western civilization often seems to be a war between realism and nominalism. And all this transgressive art is meant to liberate us from a hyper-real. There's 2 alternatives to this war, this continental war between the progressive and the conservative. One is a recovery of symbol and understanding how in symbol the real and the nominal are united. There's something, beauty isn't just real, it's something beyond. It ushers, it's an icon into something that will always be invisible. People imagine who are relentlessly and even to an ugly extent transgressive, that they're liberating us from some excessive realism that destroy freedom and destroy personal individuality.
Oftentimes, of course, art and beauty are decorations. People think of them as non-essentials to the important content. And the reality of my paintings being here at this conference for 3 days, where then they get packed up and shipped to another museum exhibit, is to me an indication of where art is going. I think that's, to me, the greatest encouragement that I can receive as an artist, who has dedicated his life to creating beauty and being able to, not only speak in the context of my work, and to me that shows something about art that is far more than just stating the principles or having even a community of people who has something to say, but it is about making. It is about living into whatever the beautiful may be, that we are committed to it. And I think, in some ways, if this conversation continues to grow and that those values of putting beauty first, in order to get to the truth, perhaps we should start at the portal of beauty, whether it be music, dance, art, theater, poetry. It's really caring for culture as a garden to steward, and beauty arises out of that nurture, and you need that vision for the whole. I need it. I need to be part of a community that highly values that.
Another way of dealing, and then trying to tie this to Alliance for Responsible Citizens, and we're talking a lot about stories, and then on a very, very rudimentary level, and not the only level which art has relevance, is that it's us communicating with each other. If we're really to be responsible, is we are to give this, the art world and culture, take it seriously, because it's a way of sharing those stories in ways that basic conversations can't necessarily share.
We need a beautiful story, and start with the beautiful story we have and embellish it, but it's there. And I was also trying to say that I think your work is crucial, because without a recovery of what the symbolic is, the nominalist voice will be lost. And it has to, the transgressive voice has to be part of that.
I left the world of contemporary art in my 20s. And it was in some part because I felt like there was a need to have things anchored and things connected. And ultimately, that's why I rediscovered traditional Christian art, understanding beauty as something not just that we look and that we consume, which is the way that most people tend to understand it, but understand beauty rather as something that we enter into and participate. That's a place very close to all of us that we can reawaken beauty. And I think also, of course, I think that as a Christian, moving toward worship is the best place to see how beauty gives itself to higher participation, right? And so when we're eating a meal together at the table, the beauty is not just in service of the feeding of our bodies, it's in service of some love that we have for each other. And that scales up, and it can scale up into neighborhoods, it can scale up into city planning, and ultimately the church, it becomes the image of that itself, where all is offered up. The heavenly Jerusalem, where all the beautiful aspects of what humans have made are offered up to the transcendent, offered up to God. What's great about this way of understanding beauty is that it's accessible to everybody, right? Everybody can make their family meals more beautiful. Everybody can make their bedrooms, their living rooms, they're just not beautiful in just a decorative sense, but beautiful in this.
It all comes down to love, right? And love is sacrifice. Love creates, and I want to go back to what you said earlier, and I agree that good design matters, and good city planning allows for diversity to flourish. But without love, it's not fulfilling. So I think beauty is connected with love ultimately.
Well, that's a wonderful positive note to finish our discussion. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe.
I think this is great.